Today's session of Tuesday Times Roundtable, Shut Up and Talk, a real conversation about students' free speech rights. My name is Michelle Zaldivar, your Senior Program Coordinator here at the Office of Global Learning Initiatives. TTR is our flagship discussion series that brings together multiple perspectives on current global issues and trends. You can learn more about TTR, watch past recordings, or come back and reference this one at go.fiu.edu/TTR. As a reminder, as we engage in today's session, we ask that everyone use the mics. We'll have 2 roaming mics. Shout out to our student volunteers that are helping us out on that side, so that we can hear everyone's contributions to the discussion on the recording. As always, QR code is your sign-in. If you haven't already, it's also posted on the side of the room. You can see us if you're having any issues at all with that. And TTR is always tied to a New York Times article. That's because TTR is brought to you by a formal partnership between FIU and the New York Times. So you can read today's article at go.fiu.edu/TTR0307. That's today's date. And if you get there and hit a paywall, that's only because you have yet to activate your free digital subscription to the New York Times. So if you go to accessnyt.com and log in with your @fiu.edu email address, you'll get a free digital subscription until you graduate for the New York Times. My medallion students, make sure that you take a screenshot of that sign-in. For medallion students, TTR is always 1 point. If you are honors college or here for any other kind of co-curricular or professor credit, whatever you're here for, we're glad you're here with us today, and we welcome you to TTR. If you want to learn more about any of these programs that are offered through the Office of Global Learning Initiatives, I and our Assistant Director, Anna Prado, who you met as you walked in and has given you a quick wave, will absolutely be here after the session to answer any additional questions that you have. If you are a GL student and want to drop in for some GL peer advisor hours, we have those virtually on Tuesdays and in person on Wednesdays. Feel free to come by and ask us any questions at all that you have. Highlighting a couple of things that are coming up. Tomorrow, we've got a GL at FIU session where we're featuring, is it FIU Prestigious? Absolutely. Ashley Kuntz and FIU Prestigious is coming to talk about some prestigious scholarships and the resources that are available to you as FIU students as you apply for and go through the interview processes for those. We're also highlighting the fact that our Global Learning Student Fellowship is receiving applications for its fall 2023 cohort. The deadline for that application for the fellowship is April 21st. You can learn more at go.fiu.edu/glfellow. And lastly, we are beyond excited for next week. Next week, March 14th, instead of our usual GC 150 space, we'll be right over across the hall in GC 140 for our annual New York Times reporter special session of Tuesday Times Roundtable. So Alicia Gupta, who is a reporter that focuses on health and women's rights and all sorts of activism-driven reporting, is coming to do her special session, The Secret Sauce to Successful Activism. My spoiler alert to you, it's the involvement of women. If you have any questions at all, feel free to hang out, but our usual time, just right across the hall, GC 140 on March 14th. And on to today's session. Leading our session today is Professor Allison Matulli. Professor Matulli is a former attorney. She's a former attorney and educator, now founder of The Little Lawyers, an organization promoting legal awareness for children. Allison is an educational reform activist who consults with schools worldwide on how to introduce, teach, and empower educators and kids to address issues of race, systemic racism, prejudice, legal literacy, diversity, and inclusion, and is a biweekly columnist for the Education Week, the leading K-12 periodical. Allison holds a BA in economics from St. Joseph's University, a master's in education from Endicott College, and a JD from Howard University School of Law. Most recently, she published Your Freedom, Your Power, a book for middle grade readers that explains how the First Amendment informs our daily lives and the fascinating stories behind how some of the most important legal cases and social movements that have affected kids' lives and rights. Please join me in welcoming Professor Allison Matulli.
First of all, who came for the free lunch? Raise your hand. Exercise your First Amendment rights. All right. One of the things I want to get to, of course, is the First Amendment. Who here knows their First Amendment rights? Who here knows there are 5 freedoms to that right? So I can tell you in undergrad, I did not know that. I knew of the First Amendment. I knew it was something that was important. I knew it was attached to the Constitution, and I knew that I wanted to know more about that. I myself, I grew up, I'm from an immigrant family. I immigrated myself. I'm a Caribbean girl. I'm from Trinidad originally. And, one thing we're brought up to do is get really good grades, do really well in school, stay quiet, keep your head under the water, so to speak. Don't, ruffle any feathers or make any waves, but not necessarily use our First Amendment rights, okay? So that culturally was something very different for me. Do you have the right to be heard? Who thinks they actually have a right to be heard? If I have something to say, I'm going to be heard. Who thinks that they have a right to be heard? Okay, so some hesitation, some definites, right? So one thing that the First Amendment does teach you is, yes, you do have the right to be heard, all right? There are certain, if you will, ways or methods within the First Amendment that are, quote unquote, the right way to go about that. But your freedom of speech is a fundamental right given to you by the Constitution. We're going to go over what those rights look like. So at what age did you first hear someone tell you, sit down, be quiet? Has anyone ever been in school or class and someone says, hey, you've got something to share? No, I need you to be quiet. Huh? Maybe even, whether it be in school, whether it be somewhere else, maybe a coach told you, it's not time to talk about that. It's not an appropriate thing. It happens to us all the time, right? Stand aside. You've got something to share, but this is not the right venue. Stand aside. Stand down. Are there memories coming to your head at this time? Close your eyes and think about that moment. Because I can tell you it happened many times to me in my lifetime. In my time in a number of schools, this was a commonplace event. So let's go over some real-world examples. Now, this is the leading case. Has anyone ever heard of this case? Mary Beth Tinker. Okay, there are a few hands that are high in the air. So if you know this case, it shows up in absolutely, I would say, 98.9% of cases that eventually come forth out of schools especially, where students are trying to advocate for their First Amendment freedoms. The reason this case is so important is because let's talk about the girl. I actually interviewed Mary Beth Tinker, and she lives very close to Howard Law, where I went, in D.C., and she is an absolutely lovely lady. We sat and we talked via Zoom in the modern world, and really about what is happening then and what is happening now, right? She talks about the fact, the thing that was really poignant to me, she talks about the fact that she was just a young girl. As a young girl, she, the pushback, she went into school, and her and her brother had decided, and a friend of his, that they were going to protest against the Vietnam War. Everyone's heard of the Vietnam War, right? So they were anti-war, they were pro-peace, and they didn't believe that this is a war that should be going on, America should be taking part in. So the first thing they had to do is her father, who's a minister, had to talk to him about wearing these black armbands, okay? Now, she talks about, going back a couple years before that, the black kids that she saw protesting for their equality, and how there was an issue during which one of those leaders had called for kids, or all of those participating in this fight, to wear black armbands because there was an issue where several little girls were killed in a certain instance. So she thought, wow, that's really, really powerful. But what really made me, understand her standpoint is she talked about the fact that she was a white privileged female that didn't have to worry so much about any kinds of acts of violence. That's not something that came to her as a possibility, right? So she talks about how that group inspired her. So it's really important sometimes to kind of read these cases because you get inspiration from someone else. She was this young girl going into school, and she's going to wear this black armband. The principal already told them no, and she's going to show up and wear it. Her brother's supposed to come in and do the same, and his friend as well. Now, she shows up there, and she's supposed to get a petition signed, right? That's one of the 5 powers of the First Amendment. So she's going to get this petition signed by the students, her fellow students, and they're going to show all their wonderful support to stop the war. And what happens? She gets 1 signature. This is real. You don't always have, we now live in the digital world where social media and everybody shows you all their likes and dislikes and this. You don't always have all the supporters on your side when you're fighting against something, right? But she still showed up. And she was asked to leave from school, and she had to face the consequences of doing that. But this case goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. And she talks about the fact that, eventually she did have death threats, and someone threw a brick through their car, and certain things she had to face as a result. So by the time she gets to her teens, that's when her case finally gets to the Supreme Court. And at that point, when she wins, right? It's great to win. It's great to come out on the side winning, right? Because then you're showing the world, I did something worth fighting for, right? But we're going to talk about maybe 1 or 2 cases where you don't end up on the winning side, but maybe you are fighting the right fight in some of your minds, right? This is very subjective, how this law is implemented. So that's talking about a 13. Now let's go to 16. That's a little closer to your age. Has anyone ever seen this case? This is Andrew Johnson. This kid was all over the news a few years ago. Got his hair chopped off. Did anyone see this case? All right. So some people think, oh my gosh, this is like a physical act. They're cutting off this kid's hair. What does that have to do with the First Amendment? Freedom of expression. Who just said that? Yes! Nail on the head. Freedom of expression. This is something that's covered by the First Amendment. He has the right, whether or not he has the right, to have natural hair. Now think about this. This is a multi-racial child, right? This is a multi-ethnic person who has dreadlocks. He shows up. He's been wrestling for a while. This is not like a new wrestler. And he encounters a person that's going to enforce the rules a certain way. And that happens all the time. You ever go to the airport and check in, and you're like, who am I going to meet? Is my bag overweight? If I meet a nice attendant, maybe they'll just let my bags through. My bags are just a couple of pounds. Please don't let me take out my underwear. So that happens. It's who you encounter, right? One person's going to let you go. The other person is going to interpret it a certain way and make you respond a certain way. This kid had his hair chopped off in order to participate in a match. Now, it got to the point where this guy was eventually terminated as a referee. But imagine how that child felt. Do you ever think it could happen to a 4-year-old? Similar. This kid got kicked out of school. He came to school, his hair braided, right? Freedom of expression again, right? Came to school, hair braided, ready to go to school, and what happens? You can't be here. It's not appropriate. These 2 particular cases I brought up because there is a national movement called the Crown Act that's actually being pushed also by a corporate-sponsored Dove. And the whole purpose of that law, and it's going state by state, so there are several states that have agreed with that law that said, yes, people of color should be able to wear their hair naturally. That's part of a fundamental right. But there are states that say, no, that doesn't work here. So sometimes, and there's a push for this to be a federal law. So we have to look at these things. Every state has their own constitution, right? But our federal constitution, our national constitution that we're talking about, that's the one that should govern how we interact with each other, that should govern ourselves, how we feel about projecting these rights in the world. Yeah. So I'll fill the gap. So one thing I want you to think about, this is going to be a nice little overview of those 5 critical freedoms, right? My son who's 10 years old, likes to point out, Mom, it's actually 2 rights and 3 freedoms. I'm like, really? But it's important for us to know that those are the 5 fundamental freedoms. And the reason it's first in our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, is because it was that important to the framers. It was really that essentially important. So let's think about the reason that it should come first to our mind when we express ourselves, when we think about what we wear, how we interact with each other, how others interact with us, right? We ourselves are our own empowerment zone. So we've got to get real about what those rights are and fully understand how to engage in this world where we ourselves are standing on that platform.
The First Amendment protects freedoms of speech, press, religion, assembly, and petition. This sounds straightforward, but the First Amendment is still the subject of continuing interpretation and dispute. So let's look at the freedom of speech, which gives Americans the right to express themselves without fear of government interference. There are a number of categories of unprotected speech, including obscenity, true threats, incitement to imminent lawless action, and defamation. But deciding what speech falls within these categories is difficult. In reaching these determinations, courts often look at speech on a case-by-case basis and consider the context in which the speech was made. For instance, political speech, support or opposition of political figures, parties, and/or policies, enjoys stronger First Amendment protection. If speech is political in nature, no matter how outrageous and offensive it might be, it may still be protected by the First Amendment. So, yeah, this gets complicated. The First Amendment protects you from government punishment for what you say in most instances. However, the First Amendment is not unlimited. It protects you from government action, not the action of private organizations or people. Unless you're employed by the government, complaining about your boss could get you fired. Similarly, since social media websites are for the most part private entities, they're the only ones who can police posts on their respective sites. Similar to freedom of speech, freedom of the press allows people to express themselves through publication. This important freedom enables our journalists and reporters to freely report news and stories of public interest. But this also comes with some limitations. For instance, defamatory statements are not protected. Again, though, what constitutes defamation also requires a fact-intensive investigation. In addition, the First Amendment protects our right to peacefully assemble or gather together as a group for like-minded social, economic, political, or religious purposes. The First Amendment also protects our right to protest the government. We are free to sign petitions or even file a lawsuit against the government as well. And lastly, in guaranteeing the freedom of religion, the First Amendment prohibits the government from establishing a state religion or from favoring one religion over the other.
Okay, so who can remember all 5? Raise your hand if you, yes. Go for it. Yes.
Speech, petition the government, religion, assembly, And why am I skipping on the fifth? Free speech, petition the government, freedom of the press.
Yes. Okay. Where does social media fall? How many of you, first of all, how many of you are on social media? Right. That's almost everybody. Is anyone not on social media? Okay, so we have a holdout. Tough to do this time, it's almost impossible. So social media falls under which? Which one of these? Yes. Press, right? Now, social media companies, they have been in the media nonstop because they say, we're not responsible for what people throw out there. I mean, I'm not at your house telling you to hate this person or hate that, government official or what have you. So that's a tricky one, right? And again, it goes back to who eventually interprets the law? The courts, right? So you see this balance of power. We talk about this balance of power and what that actually means. It actually means that there is someone that has to interpret that, right? They'll come with your facts. Oh my gosh, I was on social media. I said, how much I hate Professor Matulli. I just wish I could get rid of her. I might drive over her with my car. This happens. Students say all kinds of stuff, right? Who's liable for that? If somebody ends up, taking what she says or what he says and gets in the car and says, that Professor Matulli, yeah, she's driving me crazy too. I'm going to go over there and drive her over with my car. We're going to look at a couple of cases that are really, really important cases that will impact your world today. Not yesterday, today. Okay? There are a couple of things that are going through the courts that are really sensational. I mean, these are mind benders. Another one is, all right, I've got your boyfriend-girlfriend situation, and you say, oh my goodness, I'm going to sit on the phone with you until, you're suicidal, you've got mental health issues. Why don't you just kill yourself? Is that a horrible thing to say? Most people would agree yes, right? That's one you could just shout out yes. Professor, but that's pretty horrible. I think our moral code in us would say that's pretty horrible. But does that amount to a felony charge? Does that amount to a criminal act if that, partner, whoever that person is, does act and does commit suicide? There's an actual case that happened. I mean, these are real issues that are happening now. So it's really important for us to get a pulse, our finger on the pulse of what's happening now, and things that could affect you. All right, so we're having some cases that are being passed out. And this is the exciting part. Now we know our 5 freedoms. I mean, we're able to recite them. We all know them by heart. We're going to leave here knowing what they are, right? You're going to go home and you're going to talk to someone and say, I just learned these 5 freedoms. Let me tell you, I'm going to go out there, express myself. I'm going to petition the government. I'm going to get something going. I'm going to do all these. I'm going to assemble, something that I believe in, a group, and get together and do some protesting, or I'll get involved. I'm going to exercise my freedom of press. I'm going to write something and put it out on social media. Let's think about all these things that are protected, right? Now, I have given you a case. Everyone has a case in hand, right?
Can I do a quick shout out? If you've got one of the ones that has a blue on the side, it's zoomed in on the back. To not struggle to read the facts of the case.
Okay. So you're my lawyers now. Now you're going to take a look at your case that you were assigned, and you've got a list of all the facts of something that happened. That's the juice of the case. This is what lawyers do. They want to know what the facts are. And we want to know the good and the bad. Because when we show up in court, you've got to be able to defend against the bad, right? And you've got to be able to use the good to the max. You've got to be able to weave this all together so it sounds superb, right? you're going to find your law group. So you're going to find the people who have a similar case as you. All right? You're going to figure out if or how to protect your client under the First Amendment. Are you even able to protect these clients under the First Amendment, right? So there are 5 cases in circulation. Now, again, the facts, the law being the First Amendment, right? And you are providing the analysis with each other. You're going to say, guess what? This is going to work. This is not going to work, right? So as you look at your case, you're going to think of these particular 5 freedoms. And you can see here there are all these beautiful sticky notes here, right? And you're going to pick, they're color coordinated, right? Do you see like the light blue is religion, there's the yellow, this kind of limey color is press. Did we change? Okay, so the blue, the bright blue. Oh, okay, so the speech is the orange, correct? Okay, so speech is orange. Petition is the blue, and assembly is the pink. All right? Can everyone see that, or it needs to be in order here? You're going to actually send someone out, and they're going to get whatever sticky notes that they think is one of the freedoms that you're going to use to defend your client. Okay? So you might end up with more than one color. You might end up with just one color, okay? So let's see. Let's figure out who has what case. Do you mind if I start here? Okay, what case do you have?
I have the one that's zoomed in, the pico by pico.
Okay, does anyone have that case? Raise your hand. Okay, so let's meet. This case is going to be here in the middle. Come down here. We're just going to shift you around a little bit, okay? If you've got that case, you've got your group of lawyers that are meeting here. Quickly. You're paid by the hour. Come on, people. These are billable hours. You got to. Okay. Next case.
So I got the George Floyd with a teenager.
Okay. Perfect. Floyd issue. Come on down. Right here. Billable hours. Let me tell you, you don't know how many friends that are lawyers, friends of mine, lawyers that I know, that talk about billable hours every single day. All right, next case.
It's Elk Grove United School District versus Newdown.
Okay, Elk Grove. Yes.
Yes. Commonwealth v. Carter.
Okay, so let's put Carter over here. Carter over here. So if you're in Carter, you're right here. You got it. Yes. You're the only one? Wait, we're missing one. He's the only one who has that case?
That shouldn't have.
You have? Yeah, there you are. You just found each other. You see? That's how lawyers are. They just find each other.
So the expected privacy goes out the window, so anyone can record you.
So as a quick reminder, you're reviewing the facts of the case together and then coming down and choosing whatever post-its align with the freedoms in the First Amendment that you think are applicable to the case.
I had to get up and motion for their law for something like that. Or is it saying, like, oh, well, our government.
I think the speech of, I think, like, the
My friend has to come here for global learning. He said it was pretty much.
and in, like, certain
Service hours, too, right?
20 service hours. So, like,
Okay. By now, You have dug into the facts of your case. I can see these law firms, the mind is going, the wheels are turning, people have got stuff to say, right? Now, I know you're standing within your own little firm, so I'm going to ask each group very shortly to just pick a speaker, and you're just going to give me a 30-second analysis of what you chose, okay? A 30-second analysis of what you chose and why. Why did you choose certain parts of this First Amendment to apply to your fact pattern? Now, if you go a little over, don't worry. So, but just give us a quick synopsis of what's happening, why you chose what you chose, and how this law applies. Does that make sense? Okay, so again, we're going to give you just a few seconds to choose that speaker and hop to it, okay? So decide quickly. All right, by now, everyone has their speaker, their orator, that's going to wow us with a quick synopsis of what's happening in their case and how they applied the law. We're going to start up here. Michelle's going to... Oh, they've got the mic.
Okay, so our case was Elk Grove Union High School District and David W. Gordon. And basically Michael Newdown was arguing that his daughter, schools were violating the Establishment Clause of the U.S. Constitution First Amendment for just simply allowing his daughter to listen to Under God in the words of, in the Pledge of Allegiance. And we decided that was specifically under the freedom of religion and freedom of speech religion because he's targeting specifically like to God, and it's had the specificity of that word, and then speech because depending on we don't want to exclude any religion, so just by saying it, just by reciting it and listening, it's freedom of speech.
Great, and we see the colors there, nice and visible. Now, freedom of religion, right? Who here has ever thought twice about the fact under God is something that they hear in the pledge? Okay, so every group has a hand raised that says, oh, that's in there. Now, that's in multiple parts of various documents that are federal documents that are beloved in America, right? So it's part of our daily life. Let's go to the next case.
Speaker? All right. Hello, guys. Do I need this?
Yes, please, because
oh,
for
okay.
the recording.
Hey, guys. So I'm Rafael, and our group was in the George Floyd case, something that actually hit me very personal back in 21 when I heard about it. And the question was, did Darnella violate the law by recording the police, right? Like the famous video clip that surfaced out of social media. Was she within her rights? And absolutely she was, because we have freedom of press, which is the neon green. And at the same time, in the law, there's no expected privacy once you leave the domain of your home. So the fact that you're already out in the public, you could be recorded by anyone. I mean, that's why the paparazzi have a job, right? And then besides that fact, it's our constitutional duty to keep the government in check. And police officers are government officials. Exactly. So the fact that they're government officials, you're in public, and you have the right of press means that you are within your legal rights to do so. So no, Darnella did not violate the law. And actually, thanks to her courage, because it was courageous to kind of stand up against a perceived authority at that moment, we were able to convict the person that did that horrible act. So, yeah.
Blown away, right? Now, not only did they go through the actors that are involved, right? This is a very complicated issue, and it happens all the time. Being able to coin a person as a government official and those who are not. Now, what happened if this police officer was off duty?
There's still no expected privacy when you're in public. So I think the same would still apply. I mean, there's obviously, the law might be more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
That's what
Okay, and that's a tricky hairline fracture issue, okay? So definitely spot on when they are acting as a government official, which a police officer is in this particular case, the law protects you and gives you the right to record, Okay, that's something that comes up again and again and again and again and again and again. Next.
Thank you. So our case was the Mahanoy area school district versus a young lady who went on Snapchat and said all types of unpleasant things about her coaches when she didn't get accepted for the varsity team. And so they suspended her, and the father fought back, and the argument against it was that the rules were too broad and that it went against her right to freedom of speech and the freedom of press, since she did it on Snapchat, and that is a press app. We were a little more skeptical about using that one, since there's actually arguments going on right now that people aren't held liable, or the companies aren't held liable by what's said in those apps, but we definitely thought it was an infringement on her freedom of speech by regulating, since she wasn't on school campus when she said those things.
You just picked on the hairline detail that the Supreme Court picks on. The fact that she's off campus. And she's dropping F-bombs, people. I mean, she's not like, saying, oh, she's so mean to me. No, she's really laying into this coach. She's not, keeping it simple or keeping it PC. So the court does say that this speech is protected. So even if you're on Snapchat later on, or TikTok, and you want to make a little video, dance video, you say, Professor Matulli was being kind of crazy in this lecture that I went to, and you're like, I'm going to do a TikTok of her. Like that, you're off campus, you're going to be assured that is protected speech. Now the court does leave the door open, because this is a really new case. This is what I'm talking about. Social media is something that the court is now testing out. This is it is an explosion of potential cases to come. And every single case is going to be very different. Okay? So, let's go on to the next case.
Okay, so we had Board of Education, Island Trees Union Free School Districts, number 26, versus Pico by Pico. Basically what happened was the board banned a bunch of books from the school library against the recommendation of parents and school staff members, and they claimed that it was anti-American, anti-Christian, and anti-Semitic, and just plain filthy. That's in quotes. And so so Pico is going against the board and their decision, and basically, our group came up with the ideas of religion, speech, and maybe some press. Basically, for religion, they're claiming that the books are anti-Christian and anti-Semitic, which it's like there's no, like the books have their religious freedoms to say whatever they want to say, and so they are like freedom of speech, at least, to say what they want to say, and no matter the topic, they do have that speech to say that topic. And they have the speech to, even if it is like not like standard speech, the library should still allow that standard, that like more, not clean speech, but like still more, I don't know how to say it, but like just more nuance, more like untraditional words, like however the book is trying to. The book needs to express whatever it wants to express, and the library being restricted is stopping that book from students from reading that book and learning about that expression. And we said press partially because books are gonna talk about, because books are in them and of themselves like press. Like they're not a newspaper per se, but they are a way to submit your topics to the public.
Okay. Now, just for clarity, which side of this case do you fall on? Do you believe that these books should be banned or they should not?
Should not.
Okay. So this case is happening all over where we are now. Has anyone heard of banned books lately? Yes. Okay. You can't turn on your news in Florida without hearing about another book banned. So yes, this is a hot topic. Freedom of press. First of all, it's a publication, right? So, and then you have freedom of speech. You do have freedom of religion in this particular one because of the content, right? But it's not always there. But you see it here. right? So for various reasons, this is a hot topic. You know, we just had Read Week, which my kids participated in, and it was all about Dr. Seuss. Has anyone heard about banned books for Dr. Seuss? Right? And the books went crazy in cost, and if someone has one from childhood, they've got to hold on to it. But yeah, this is happening. This is real, and it's happening in curriculum that you study yourself, you know. So think about this one. This is really important. Next topic, next case.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marissa, and the case that we'll be discussing is Commonwealth versus Carter. So, the victim, Conrad Roy, he essentially he had attempted suicide in the past, and allegedly, due to the defendant Michelle Carter, she ended up. So she sent him several text messages, during which. Basically urging him to kill himself. There was also a phone call amongst them in which the victim he was attempting suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning, so he was sitting in a car. And as a result, while he was talking to his girlfriend, Michelle Carter, he got out of the truck and she had urged him to get back into the truck. So the question is, was this conviction supported by sufficient evidence? As the judge ruled that her actions and failure to act constituted wanton and reckless conduct that caused the victim's death. So we decided that to side with the judge, that her actions did cause this. Now the freedom, which could be disputed, is freedom of speech. Is she allowed to say this? Did her words contribute to his death? And if so, is that protected or not? So we decided no, it is not protected.
Okay, so this case, I'm going to ask everyone to sit down. This law firm did a great job presenting this particular case. Let's sit down and talk about this case, okay? It deals with social media, which you're all on, almost all, right? It's always at 98.9, right? You always go with that number, never go with 100. But the reason why this case is so relevant, is because there is criminal liability for telling someone something. Do you have criminal liability for telling someone something? Essentially, that if you just pull apart all the facts, forget about if you hate Michelle Carter and you think she is the worst human being on the face of this earth, okay? Do you think you have criminal felony charges that could be brought against you and could be held up in a court of law as a result of telling someone something? Let's start the brigades.
I mean, I guess the automatic example in my brain is just conspiracy to commit whatever. Like, conspiracy in and of itself is a crime, and you can be convicted under conspiracy alone. So I feel like just based on that, that makes speech to aid in a suicide, like, unprotected.
We've got another.
I feel like when you're looking at these different type of cases and arguments, it all comes down to intent. So I don't know, like, if she was genuine in what she was arguing of wanting him to cause harm to himself, then I can understand why that's not protected speech. But I think when we get to the intent of some of these things, because we sometimes say things off the cuff. So if someone just says something off the cuff and it's taken in a manner not intended, if someone says something humorous or in a different type of way, like if a comedian speaking and says something and someone interprets it as an act of violence, that wasn't his intent or her intent, though. So I think that's where we kind of have to examine that, I think.
You have a second light? Yes.
And just adding on to his argument of intent, as well as I think like consequences of the words, like with intent and consequence, like in this case, maybe if like she thought like it was for the better, regardless, she said what she said, which in turn changed the course of events that happened in the end, which was the loss of a life. And at that point, it's when you start to evaluate like the overall participation because of the consequences that happened after.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I agree because even though, yeah, it is freedom of speech and you do have the right to say, it's that intent. And I think another example would be January 6th, based on how a lot of people were influenced and that caused an extreme damage to democracy. So the question is, like, should Trump be responsible for what he said during the process of the election and how he felt about it?
So before I make the argument, could you just rephrase real quickly the question?
Sure. So we're looking at this particular case, okay? On the Michelle Carter case, it does result in criminal conviction. She goes to jail, okay? But essentially, she was on the phone and she was texting her boyfriend and told him and egged him on to kill himself. Now, does that reality of a criminal charge, is that legal? Is that fair? What are your thoughts?
So it's going to sound extremely unpleasant what I'm about to say because ethically I'm on everybody's side here. It's extremely disgusting and a human shouldn't do that, ethically speaking. But the law sometimes doesn't really care about the morality of things as much as the facts. So if I'm going to pull up a George Orwell reference about the thought police and kind of like, so are we going to be held liable for every single thing we say? And then if that action, whether positive or bad, results in another person, are we responsible for what they acted on? Because if we go by that, I could watch a horror movie and be extremely compelled to go commit something that's not good. But does that mean that the people that wrote the movie are responsible for the actions I myself did? So I know ethically it's like, like I'm caught up inside about doing it, but I think that no, like people have the action to choose what they do, and whether or not you say something that's distasteful, that person shouldn't criminally be convicted. Now ethically, the fact that you're gonna have to live with yourself, hell yeah, and only that's between you and what you believe in, and you're gonna have to carry that your whole life, and that's something that's never gonna go away from you. But I guess in a law perspective, we can't. I would say no. We shouldn't convict people that say things we dislike. Thank you.
Last phrase, shut up and talk, people. You have been incredible. Now we're out of time, and that is literally a Socratic dialogue on something that could go a million different ways, right? Based on facts, and that's what courts are doing. They're looking at the law, and they're looking how to interpret these facts. It's really important for us to know our rights and to be able to tune into that and lean into those moments where we are called upon, where we have those Mary Beth Tinker moments, where our voice is needed to speak up about something. And it could be something small, it could be something big. But our voice is warranted, and we have the power to do so. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for being here. So I'm just going to jump ahead for a second just to make sure that this information's out there. It is 1:30, so if you've scheduled us in between a couple of classes, I absolutely appreciate you being here, and you're more than welcome to grab your things and go. Thank you so much for coming. If you'd like to hang out, we will definitely not kick you out of the room. We will still be here if you have questions that you want to ask. I don't know, Professor Matulli, if you're on a rush to somewhere else.
Yes, one thing I do want to tell you that's really, really important in life, and they teach you this in law school. You carry around your little pocket constitution. Lawyers do this all the time. It's nerdy, I know. I do it. But you carry around a little pocket constitution, and if something you're not sure about, guess what? You pull it out, and you've got it right there. It's light. It's easy, right, to carry. And if you're really into some of these cases, I have a book coming out called Your Freedom, Your Power. Now, this is my copy of it that they just sent me. but it's out this summer, and it really breaks down law, and it shows how young people have used the law, okay? But regardless, make sure you get one of these, okay? That's it.
Join me in thanking our speaker one more time. Thank you so much, Professor.